Ignatius Press and the Augustine Institute present the Formed Book Club. Catholic book lovers unpacking good books, chapter by chapter. If you like us, please help us by subscribing and by reviewing us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you might listen. And don't forget to sign up for weekly updates and study questions at formedbookclub.ignatius.com.
Welcome to the Formed Book Club. I'm here in Ave Maria, Florida with Joseph Pierce. We're giving a class on G.K. Chesterton, and therefore I've lost my voice by raising it too much in controversy with Joseph. And Vivian is holding the fort down there in San Francisco. We're going to begin discussing the book by Joseph Ratzinger, who became Pope Benedict, The Spirit of the Liturgy. We're going to try a new format going forward, or at least we'll try it once and see if we go forward after that. Namely, each time we do a book, there'll be one person responsible for that book who will do the introduction and make a presentation of each chapter, during which people can intervene or interject or interrupt, and after which they can also add things and we can discuss it. So we'll try that here. We have two versions of this book. We have my version that I'm using, which is the older version, and I'm using it because it's so marked up. I don't want to remark a new book, but there's a new version which you can hold up, Joseph, so they can see. This is a new anniversary version of the Spirit of Liturgy, and it has two preliminary texts, one by Cardinal Seurat and one by Pope Benedict, and Joseph wants to comment on those. I don't have them in mind, so I won't comment on them.
Yeah.
I want to give first just a brief introduction of the book.
Absolutely.
Okay. As we know, Pope Benedict has passed, has died, he's gone to his reward, and I believe he will be rewarded. And this is part of his legacy, this book. And I would say it's a central part in two ways. First, it's kind of temporally central. Kind of his first major work was in the early 70s, Introduction to Christianity. And his last major work was Jesus of Nazareth, which is in the teens or late aughts. And this book was written between 1990 and 1999. And those are the only major books he wrote, which, well, actually, even Introduction to Liturgy was not actually a book. It was a collection of his lectures at Tübingen in 1968 and 9, I think. On the Creed, basic commentary on the Creed. Most of his books, especially after he became Archbishop of Munich Freising and then later Cardinal Prefect of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, were not, strictly speaking, books written as a whole, but they were collections of essays or homilies or addresses or radio talks, whatever, that were on a common theme and maybe even had been planned and given as part of a totality, but nevertheless, he did not sit down and write a book. That's one reason that it's central, because it's in the middle of his writing career. Secondly, though, it's central because this is a book about the liturgy. And if there's anything that was central to his life, it was the liturgy. He was born, as people I think now know, on the vigil of Easter Sunday in 1927. So in those days, they had the Easter Vigil ceremonies in the morning. So he was born at 4:30 or so on Holy Saturday morning, and at 8:30 his mother brought him to the vigil and he was baptized. So his natural and his supernatural life are embedded, as it were, in the holiest 3 days of the church's year. As he was declining in December, I had a premonition that he would die on some day that would make his life even more symbolic. And he died on December 31st, which the fact that it's the end of the year is not so symbolic, but the fact that the next day, that December 31st is the vigil day for the solemnity of Mary, Mother of God, that is symbolic, that he's born in the middle of Holy Week, at the end of Holy Week in the Triduum, and he dies at the vigil of Our Lady. Perfectly brackets, so to speak, his life. This particular book, I had some involvement in from the beginning, because it was written at a time when I was still active in the leadership or the board of the Casa Balthasar in Rome, which was a house of discernment and formation for young men, and which had been founded in 1989 with Cardinal Ratzinger as our protector, and myself and another Jesuit, and Father Ouellet, who became Cardinal Ouellet, and Father Schönborn became Cardinal Schönborn. The two Jesuits, of course, in our humility, did not accept any call like that. We didn't get a call either, but so we would meet with him every February, and he'd come by, and we'd have meetings in the afternoon. We'd have dinner. We'd have recreate. We'd always have mass first, meetings, dinner, and then recreation. And we'd ask him questions, and I'd ask him, well, what are you working on? And he said, well, I'm beginning to write a book. This is 1990. I'm beginning to write a book on the liturgy. And I said, oh, that's going to be wonderful, because I know you love the liturgy and so on. And then every year thereafter, I would ask him, well, how's it going? He said, well, I don't have much time to write. So it's coming along, but it's taking time. So in 1999, I remember exactly where I was back in fall, August, September, when the manuscript came. Einführung in den Geist der Liturgie, Introduction to the Spirit of Liturgy. And there it was. During that period of time, I myself have been doing more reflection on liturgy, and had come up with some thoughts that I thought were important, that I began to hold on pretty fiercely to. Excuse me. And when I got the manuscript, I thought, I don't want to be in disagreement with Cardinal Ratzinger, So I began reading this thing, and I just jumped up and gave the victory sign. I said, this is phenomenal. All the little thoughts I've had, he's got them in there expressed much more beautifully, much more profoundly. So this is a book that really was central to him, and he spent 10 years producing it, and it's central to us because it's about the liturgy. And I've said this before, no one so far has ever contradicted me that I know of, but certainly it's the best book on liturgy that I've ever read or even know about, but I think it's probably the best book on liturgy ever written. It's profound, and it's clear, it's beautiful. So with that eulogium, let's dive into the text. I want to start with chapter 1, or the preface actually, but Joseph, you would like to make some comments on the preparatory text here.
Yes, obviously this is the new edition to commemorate the 40th anniversary of Ignatius Press, and I think that's also worth celebrating. And it's not just I'm not the only person saying that. Cardinal Sarah says it in the foreword, and I think it's only appropriate that the credit is where it's due here. So the very first sentence or two of Cardinal Sarah's foreword is 40 years ago, as the ecclesiastical turmoil of the 1970s continued, a 37-year-old American Jesuit founded a new publishing house with the objective, as he would later assert, to support the teachings of the Church. This year, as we celebrate the 40th anniversary of Ignatius Press, it is only appropriate to give thanks to Almighty God for the vision and courage of this loyal son of St. Ignatius, Father Joseph Fessio, S.J., and for his fidelity, tenacity, and perseverance these past 4 decades, to which I will just merely add, here. And then, having addressed the importance of Ignatius Press and its founder, the beginning of the next paragraph, in selecting the Spirit of the Liturgy, written by his former teacher, Joseph Cardinal Ratzinger, now our beloved Pope Emeritus Benedict XVI, as the title with which to mark the 40th anniversary of Ignatius Press, Father Fessio himself does not fail to teach us. For of all the excellent theological, philosophical, spiritual, catechetical, historical, literary, and other works he has published, this title makes manifest the heart and soul of all his endeavors. So I think that absolutely is worth noting. And also, after the foreword, there's a new preface by Pope Emeritus Benedict XVI. And I think we'll just read the opening. Well, no, maybe something else as well. I heartily congratulate Ignatius Press on its 40 years of existence. For me, this is an occasion for giving very personal thanks, since it was Ignatius Press that first opened for me the door to America and gave me a voice in American Catholicism. And then, just to conclude, for this reason, I'm also glad to know that the press intends to publish a small programmatic writing of Romano Guardini's entitled The Spirit of the Liturgy. Above all, I would like to address a word of thanks to the founder of Ignatius Press, Father Joseph de Fessio, SJ. I shall never forget the first visit he paid me. Father de Lubac had commended him to me as a true Jesuit. And I could and would like to carry on reading. I don't want to embarrass Father Fessio any further.
I'd love to hear it. Love to hear it.
but yeah, all credit where it's due. Everything that these great men of the church say is true. And a much more, less important note, I am sitting here now because of you and Ignatius Press, because it was Ignatius Press that first published my biography of Chesterton and Literary Converts. And if it wasn't for those books, I would not have been offered a job at Ave Maria. I would not be living in the States now. So, you've changed lives, many lives, and I want to personally thank you. And also thank you through the words of, obviously, these two great eminenti of the church. And just one other thing before we start, Father, I just want to stress this as well, because thinking that some people might think that, that somehow or other Cardinal Ratzinger is out of step with Pope St. John Paul II, that in his writings on the liturgy. It's unthinkable that St. John Paul II's right-hand man would have done anything at all without it being sanctioned and endorsed by his boss, right? Because it would be an act of betrayal. And to actually write anything which is going to embarrass St. John Paul II. So we have to say this is not just Pope Benedict XVI's view of the liturgy. Implicitly, the fact that he was such a close colleague, the right-hand man of St. John Paul II, implicitly St. John Paul II's signing off on this as well.
And they were complementary, both with the I and the E in that spelling, but in terms of their emphases and so on. And John Paul II was more philosophic and also more of an outgoing actor type who had a real presence on the stage. And his liturgies were beautiful, but sometimes they were, have these world youth masses and 200,000 people there, 500,000 people. I mean, that's not exactly your typical mass, right? So you can't really judge him on those. Benedict was more reflective, more interior. They're both charming and friendly and humor, a sense of humor, wonderful. But Benedict was more reflective, and liturgically, I mean, when he came to the altar, suddenly there was an awe and silence that filled the whole church. He was a man who embodied liturgical, homo liturgicus, And then one little anecdote I want to put in here for the record, because you quoted that thing where he said that he's grateful to us because we introduced him to the American reading public. Well, I heard this from a person who was present at this. There was an audience after his election as Pope, some years after that, that he gave to this woman who was the head of a Catholic publishing company in the United States. And she asked him, she said, well, Holy Father, why is it that, only Ignatius Press is publishing your books? And he said, because when no one cared or knew about me, they published me.
Wow.
Very beautiful. So let's delve into it.
Yeah.
Vivian, did you want to add anything or correct anything? Or?
No.
Okay. So my edition of this, which doesn't have the front matter, is 14 pages off of your edition. And then maybe if you're watching or listening and have one or the other, so I'll use my number and I'll give your number after that. I'll practice my math by adding 14 or a page number. Now, of course, the first page doesn't have a number. Oh, is it? No, it doesn't. The first page is the original preface. It will be page 21 in your book. It's page 7 in mine. And I'm just going to go through the preface in these chapters and quote certain selective passages, which I think kind of help to summarize in a skeletal fashion what the chapter is. And then at any point, Vivian or Joseph, you can enter in and comment. And then at the end, you can add what you want and we'll comment on that. So he mentions, as you did in what you read, Joseph, on page 21 there, Romano Guardini's first little book, The Spirit of Liturgy. It's interesting now, they're both called in English The Spirit of Liturgy, but Guardini's little book, which was a bond-breaking, what do they call it? Groundbreaking book in liturgy during the early 20th century, was called Fom Geist der Liturgie, of the Geist, Spirit of Liturgy. And Ratzinger's book was called Einführung in den Geist, etc., the introduction to. We called it the Spirit of Liturgy because we thought it was more than an introduction. We thought this is the Spirit of Liturgy, But he says here, about 5 lines down, this slim volume may rightly be said to have inaugurated, this is Guardini now, the liturgical movement, capital L, capital M, in Germany. Its contribution was decisive. It helped us to rediscover the liturgy in all its beauty, hidden wealth, and time-transcending grandeur, to see it as the animating center of the church, the very center of Christian life. Now comes a very important word. It talks about striving for a celebration which should be more substantial. Wesentliche in Germany, in German, one of Guardini's favorite words. Well, it's also one of Ratzinger's favorite words. Wesen in German means essence, the core, the kernel, what a thing really is. And so he then says, further up towards the bottom of the page, what happened, between the Council of Trent and early 20th century. The liturgy was rather like a fresco. It had been preserved from damage, but it had been almost completely overlaid with whitewash by later generations. On page 22, the fresco was laid bare by the liturgical movement and in a definitive way by the Second Vatican Council, which, by the way, issued as its first document, Sacrosanctum Concilium on the liturgy. And the reason it could do that, it didn't do it because it was most important, although it is very important, but because the liturgical movement had been going on for decades, and there had been conferences, and there had been papers, and there had been reflections, and there had been lay people and priests and religious and prelates and so on involved. They already had kind of an agenda, what they thought needed to be done to reinvigorate the liturgy. And so what the council did, they took all that massive reflection and research, and they sifted through it, and then they made a kind of a summary, organic summary in that document, which is one of the most important documents and a beautiful document of the council. So the fresco was laid bare in a definitive way by the Second Vatican Council. For a moment, its colors and figures fascinated us. But since then, the fresco has been endangered by climatic conditions. He's talking about what happened after the council. So this fresco was kind of refreshed, repristinated, but then it's been endangered by climatic conditions as well as by various restorations and reconstructions. In fact, it is threatened with destruction if the necessary steps are not taken to stop these damaging influences. So he's writing this in 1990, right? And he's saying the council was a tremendous step in the right direction, but it's been obfuscated, it's been distorted, it's been sidetracked. And it is threatened with destruction, the liturgy, the fresco, the liturgy, if the necessary steps aren't taken. Of course, there must be no question of it's being covered with whitewash again. That is, he's not saying go back entirely to the Mass prior to the council. But what is imperative is a new reverence in the way we treat it, a new understanding of its message and its reality, so the rediscovery does not become the first stage of irreparable loss. So that's his analysis of the situation. What does he say? My purpose in writing this little book, which I now lay before the public, is to assist this renewal of understanding. It's not primarily renewal of forms or structures. Bottom of the page, if this book were to encourage in a new way something like a, quote, liturgical movement, close quotes, a movement movement toward the liturgy and toward the right way of celebrating liturgy, inwardly and outwardly, so our inner intentions and the outward form, then the intention that inspires writing would richly fulfill. So that's his preface, which describes the situation and what he's going to do. Any additions or comments on that?
Not from me. Vivian?
No.
All right. So you turn the page, you get to part 1, and it says the essence of the liturgy. Das Wesen der Liturgie. I want to emphasize that. That word's going to come up again and again. He's going to be talking about not what's accidental, not what could be one way or the other, something which is so central that it belongs to the very being, the very nature of the liturgy. So now, chapter 1, page 27, he starts out, again, he was a great teacher, you know. He placed a question before you, give some different answers, and then kind of resolve the problem. So how did he, was ist die Liturgie? What is the liturgy? Now, he mentions that Guardini had used as an image for the liturgy the idea of play. Why play? Because when you're playing, there's no object outside the play. I'm not talking about professional football now. I'm talking about when you're dancing in the street or playing marbles or something like that, or just doing hopscotch. You're not trying to win. You're trying to express your joy. It's kind of a fulfillment, a completion. It's not done for the purpose of something else. It's something which is done for itself. And so that was the image that Guardini used, you know. But on page 29, the top 4 lines down, he says, but this analogy still lacks something essential. There it is. So play is all right, but it's lacking something essential. What? The idea of a life to come appears only as a vague postulate. So play is also so self-contained that you're not thinking about what comes after, you know? The reference to God, without whom the, quote, life to come would only be a wasteland, remains quite indeterminate. I would like to suggest, therefore, a new approach, this time starting with specific biblical text. That's another thing which is characteristic of Ratzinger. Whenever he approaches a theme, I mean, it's probably universal, maybe 1 or 2 exceptions, he always goes to Scripture, you know, to find something which is a scriptural basis for the thing. And here he's going to go to something which, I mean, so many times I experienced when he was my teacher, it'd be something illuminating I never thought about before. Middle of the page, well, up above that, it says, he talks about the Exodus, which appears to have 2 distinct goals. The first, which is familiar to us all, is the reaching of the promised land. Skipping a few lines. But we also hear repeatedly of another goal. God's original command to Pharaoh runs as follows: let my people go that they may serve me in the wilderness. I always thought that was a pretext. I always thought that, you know, Moses said that to the Pharaoh because we had to do something. There's a reason we're going to the desert. We're going to worship out there, you know. I just thought that was a way of saying, okay, let us go, you know. Ratzinger, no, he sees this as really central. So on the next page, 30, but 2/3 down, in all this, the issue is not the promised land. The only goal of the Exodus is shown to be worship, which can only take place according to God's measure and therefore eludes the rules of the game of political compromise. Israel departs not in order to be a people like all others, that is, just to have your own land. It departs in order to serve God. And then on the next page, 31, to oppose land and worship makes no sense. The land is given to the people to be a place for the worship of the true God. And we'll see, of course, in Israel, Palestine, you're going to have Jerusalem, and you're going to have the temple. The very center of the life of the state or of the people is that temple. And down about 1/3 of the page, the land, considered just in itself, is an indeterminate good. It only becomes a true good, a real gift, a promise fulfilled when it is a place where God reigns. So he's seeing this, you know, the liturgy beginning and the whole movement of the people. God releases them from their slavery, not just to get a place of their own, a land of their own, but to be formed into a people that can worship Him properly. That's a beautiful idea. So next page, 32. Or wait a second, to start page. Yeah, okay. He now quotes Irenaeus. And by the way, this is an important quote because you hear this often, the first part. The glory of God is the living man. that is to say, when we're fully alive, a man fully alive, a person fully alive, that it glorifies God. We're expressions of the radiation of his glory and so on. And, but they don't finish the sentence. But the life of man is the vision of God. So in Latin is Gloria Dei vivens homo, the glory of God as a living, vital man. Visio, vita hominis, but that vita, the life, visio Dei is a vision of God. And so he continues here at the top of the page, getting to the heart of what happens when man meets God on the mountain in the wilderness. Ultimately, it is the very life of man. Man himself is living righteously, that is the true worship of God. But life only becomes real life when it receives its form from looking toward God. Cult, and the word cult can have a negative, intonation in English, but it comes from culture, agriculture, and divine cult. They're all related. Cult exists in order to communicate this vision and to give life in such a way that the glory is given to God. And now he continues. 3 things are important for the question we are considering. First of all, on Sinai, the people received not only instructions about worship, but also an all-embracing rule of law and life. So he's going to make this point, which to me was, as I say, very illuminating. That the whole point of Moses up on the mountain in Sinai, speaking with God, was that God was going to give a triple rule of life: how to worship, how to organize your society in a just way, and how to live ethically and morally. And the 3 are intertwined. Middle of the page. This brings me to my second point. In the ordering of the covenant on Sinai, the 3 aspects of worship, law, and ethics are inseparably interwoven. Bottom of the page. We must not forget that there is essential, I emphasize that again, connection between the 3 orders of worship, law, and ethics. Law, without a foundation of morality, becomes injustice. Do we see that happening? We have things called laws, which really are injustices. When morality and law do not originate in a God perspective, they degrade man because they rob him of his highest measure and his highest capacity, deprive him of any vision of the infinite and eternal. So law, ethics, worship, they must go together. 10 lines down. When human affairs are so ordered that there is no recognition of God, there is a belittling of man. And again, this was something, we'll take that book in the future that de Lubac wrote on the drama of atheist humanism. In the 19th century, they tried to construct a society without God. And what did it do? It destroyed man. I'm running off. I should pause a bit in case you guys want to interject anything here, but I'm almost finished. Or maybe I'm not. Yes, I am. So on the next page,
perhaps we should end this session with this chapter.
We probably should.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because we had the long introduction, which was necessary, but all right. So the top of that, page 33 there, or page 19. When human affairs are, I already read that. The bottom of the page, about, I don't know, 2/3 down. Sinai is not a halfway house, on the way to Palestine, a kind of stop for refreshment on the road to what really matters. No, Sinai gives Israel, so to speak, its interior land, without which the exterior one would be a cheerless prospect. Israel is considered as a people through the covenant and the divine law it contains. It has received a common rule for righteous living. This and this alone is what makes the land a real gift. Sinai remains present in the promised land. When the reality of Sinai is lost, the land too is inwardly lost until finally the people are thrust into exile. Because he has a whole section in another book about this, where because Israel lost its inner land, the Sinai, the worship, They also then lost the outer land, went in exile. Next page, 20 or 34, bottom paragraph there. But once again, what does all this mean for a problem? First, it becomes clear that cult, seen in its true breadth and depth, goes beyond the action of the liturgy. Ultimately, it embraces the ordering of the whole of human life in Irenaeus' sense. Man becomes a glory for God, puts God, so to speak, into the light, and that is what worship is, when he lives by looking toward God. On the next page, 4 lines down, it is only therefore when man's relationship with God is right that all his other relationships, his relations with his fellow men, his dealings with the rest of creation, can be in good order. As we have seen, law is essential for freedom and community. Worship, that is the right way to relate to God, is for its part essential for law. Basically, we can now broaden the insight by taking a further step. Worship, that is the right kind of cult of relationship with God, is essential for the right kind of human existence in the world. And now, Bonamy says, we come to a final reflection. Man himself cannot simply make worship. If God does not reveal himself, man is clutching empty space. And this is a theme that comes back in many of his writings, that after the council, there was too much of an attempt to kind of fabricate the Mass, recreate it by our own efforts. And he says, you can't do that with liturgy. Worship isn't made that way. Only 2 more pages in the chapter, top of page 34. Man can reach out toward God in his thinking and try to feel his way towards him. But real liturgy implies that God responds and reveals how we can worship him. Bottom of the page. No, let's go to the final page there. Because now there's the sour note that comes into to what happened in Sinai. 4 lines down. This gives us a clue to the second point. The worship of the golden calf. Because remember, after Moses is up there too long, people get bored. They create a golden calf, start worshiping it. The worship of the golden calf is a self-generated cult. When Moses stays away for too long, God himself becomes inaccessible, people just fetch him back. Worship becomes a feast that the community gives itself, a festival of self-affirmation. Instead of being worship of God, it becomes a circle closed in on itself, eating, drinking, making merry. Then 3 lines below that, the narrative of the golden calf is a warning about any kind of self-initiated and self-seeking worship. I know I've read almost the whole chapter, but he's so clear, hard even to comment on it, but it's good to restate it, to read it out loud. So, Vivian, Joseph.
Vivian.
Well, it's good to end on the golden calf because we really have 2 choices before us: the right worship of God or idolatry. And idolatry can creep up on you. People might not think they're being idolatrous because they're innovating this or that or trying this or that. But I love it when he says, worship is no longer idolatry now. This is the bottom of R36. The people cannot cope with the invisible, remote, and mysterious God. This is the people in the wilderness now that Moses has led out of Egypt. They want to bring God down into their own world, into what they can see and understand. Worship is no longer going up to God, but drawing God down into one's own world. He must be there when he is needed, and he must be the kind of God that is needed. Man is using God. And in reality, even if it is not outwardly discernible, he is placing himself above God. That is you mentioned the importance of the word essence. That is the essence of idolatry. Man making himself God. So there you go. That's the choice. We either become idolaters or true worshipers, and thank God we have Pope Benedict to help us become true worshipers of God.
Amen. No, I have nothing to add to that.
All right. Well, I mean, I think we can summarize this, or at least take a main point out of it, that for him, the liturgy is not something off to the side, a part of life that is in a compartment by itself, but that liturgy, and it's part of a moral life, and it's part of a social structure. And without the liturgy, the moral life becomes decadent, and the structure becomes unjust. Now this chapter by itself demonstrates what a clear, beautiful mind he has. So let's try to do 2 chapters next week, chapters 2 and 3.
Yeah.
All right.
Got it.
Thanks, everyone. God bless you all.
Thank you, Father and Joseph.
If you enjoyed this discussion, please help spread the word about the Forum Book Club by subscribing to the podcast and writing a review. You can sign up for weekly updates at forumbookclub.ignatius.com.